Deep in the canyon, a lonely lumberjack found a crying girl. She held the ring his wife was buried with. Before we dive into this captivating tale from the Old West, I want to personally welcome you to our storytelling journey. If this is your first time here, you're about to experience a story that will tug at your heartstrings and keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end. If you're a returning listener, thank you for your continued support. It means the world to us. Take a moment right now to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story. And please, let us know in the comments where you're listening from today. Are you curled up on your couch, listening during your commute, or perhaps enjoying this story while working on a project? Your comments fuel our passion for storytelling, and we love connecting with listeners from around the world. Now, settle in as we travel back to the rugged landscape of the Old West, where a lonely lumberjack's life is about to change forever. The morning sun crept over the eastern ridge of Willow Canyon, casting long shadows across Jacob Miller's weather-beaten cabin. At 42, Jacob had spent the last 5 years alone in these woods, his large, calloused hands finding purpose in the rhythm of his axe and saw. The locals from the nearby town of Redemption called him a hermit, but Jacob preferred the term solitary. There was comfort in the distinction. He stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, watching steam rise against the crisp autumn air. His beard, once dark brown, now showed streaks of silver that matched the early frost clinging to the pines surrounding his property. The mountains had been his refuge since Sarah's passing, a place where memories could fade into the mist that hung in the valley below. Another day, he muttered to himself, a ritual that had replaced morning conversations with his wife. Jacob's cabin sat nestled between towering pines and a small creek that provided fresh water year-round. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves of books, Sarah's books, that he couldn't bear to part with, though he rarely opened them anymore. A single photograph in a wooden frame hung beside the stone fireplace. Sarah in her wedding dress, smiling beneath the old oak tree that once stood behind their first home in town. The lumberjack finished his coffee and set about his daily routine. He fed the chickens that provided eggs, checked his small vegetable garden, and prepared his tools for the day's work. Jacob had contracts with the sawmill in Redemption, supplying lumber for the expanding town. It was honest work that kept his hands busy and his mind occupied as he walked the familiar path into the deeper woods, axe slung over his shoulder. Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about the air today. Perhaps it was the way the birds had fallen silent just before dawn, or how the wind seemed to whisper through the canyon with unusual urgency. The feeling persisted as he reached his current work site, where several marked trees awaited his attention. He removed his worn leather jacket, revealing a simple gold chain around his neck. At the end of the chain hung his wedding ring. He couldn't bear to wear it on his finger anymore, but neither could he bear to be without it. Jacob positioned himself before the first pine, took a deep breath, and swung his axe. The familiar thunk of metal biting into wood echoed through the canyon, but as the sound bounced back from the distant rocks, it seemed to carry with it something unexpected, like the faint echo of a child's cry. He paused, listening. Years in the wilderness had sharpened his senses. The forest was speaking to him in a language he had learned to understand, and today it was telling him something was wrong. Jacob lowered his axe. The strange feeling that had followed him from dawn intensified. He turned toward the deeper part of the canyon, where the trees grew denser and fewer people ever ventured. The sound came again, unmistakably a child's sob, carried on the wind. Without hesitation, Jacob secured his tools and began moving toward the sound. His solitary existence had taught him caution, but it had never erased his humanity. Something or someone was in trouble, and despite his preference for isolation, Jacob Miller could not ignore a cry for help. Little did he know that answering that distant sob would unearth secrets long buried, including one that connected directly to the ring that had been laid to rest with his beloved Sarah 5 years ago. The forest grew denser as Jacob pushed deeper into the canyon. Pine needles cushioned his footsteps, while branches reached out like gnarled fingers, scraping against his weathered flannel shirt. The crying had stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Hello?" he called, his deep voice reverberating through the trees. "Anyone there?" No response came, but Jacob pressed on, guided by instinct and the memory of that plaintive cry. After 20 minutes of difficult hiking, he reached a small clearing near the edge of a steep ravine. Water from recent rains had carved pathways down the rocky slope, creating treacherous conditions. That's when he saw her. A small figure huddled against the base of a large boulder, knees pulled tight against her chest. A girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old, with tangled dark hair and clothes that had clearly seen better days. She was shivering, though whether from cold or fear Jacob couldn't tell. He approached slowly, deliberately making noise so as not to startle her. "Hey there," he said softly, crouching down several feet away. "Are you hurt?" The girl's head snapped up, revealing a dirt-smudged face streaked with tears. Her eyes, a startling shade of amber, widened with fear and something else, recognition. But that was impossible. Jacob had never seen this child before. "It's okay," he assured her, staying where he was. "I won't hurt you. My name's Jacob. I live not far from here." The girl stared at him for a long moment before speaking. "I'm lost," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves. "I can't find my way back." "Back where?" Jacob asked gently. "Where are your folks?" This question brought fresh tears to her eyes. "And gone," was all she said, the word hanging between them like a physical thing. Jacob nodded, understanding loss in a way few others could. "What's your name?" "Ellie," she replied, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Ellie Thompson." The name struck Jacob like a physical blow. Thompson was Sarah's maiden name. It was a common enough surname, he reasoned, but the coincidence unsettled him. "Well, Ellie," he said, pushing the thought aside, "it'll be dark soon, and these woods aren't safe at night. My cabin's about an hour's walk from here. We can get you warm, fed, and figure things out in the morning." "That sound okay?" Ellie hesitated, then gave a small nod. As she uncurled from her protective position, Jacob noticed she was clutching something tightly in her right hand, something that caught the fading sunlight and reflected it in a golden flash. "What have you got there?" he asked casually, extending his hand to help her up. Slowly, reluctantly, Ellie opened her palm to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond at its center. Jacob felt the blood drain from his face. He knew this ring, knew every scratch on its band, every facet of its modest stone. It was Sarah's wedding ring, the same ring he had placed on her finger when they married, the same ring that had been buried with her 5 years ago. "And where did you get that?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Ellie closed her fingers around the ring once more, clutching it to her chest. "She gave it to me," she whispered. "She said I had to find you." Jacob's mind reeled. This was impossible. His heart hammered against his ribs as questions flooded his thoughts. Who was this child? How did she have Sarah's ring? And who was the she that had sent Ellie to find him? "Let's get you to safety," he managed to say, pushing his confusion aside. "Then we can talk about that ring." As they began the trek back to his cabin, dark clouds gathered overhead, promising a storm. But the real tempest, Jacob sensed, was just beginning, one that would uproot everything he thought he knew about his past, his present, and the truth about Sarah's death. The storm hit just as Jacob and Ellie reached the cabin. Rain pounded the roof, while wind howled through the canyon like a wounded animal. Inside, the fire cast dancing shadows across the wooden walls as Jacob placed a bowl of hot stew in front of the girl. Ellie had barely spoken during their journey back, but her eyes had taken in everything: the tools of Jacob's trade, the well-worn path, and most notably, the photograph of Sarah beside the fireplace. When she spotted it, her breath had caught audibly, but she offered no explanation. Now, warmed by the fire and with dry clothes Jacob had fashioned from one of his old shirts, she seemed ready to talk. She ate hungrily, holding the spoon with the careful precision of a child who had been taught proper manners. "Thank you," she said quietly when she finished, placing the spoon neatly beside the empty bowl. Jacob nodded, taking the dish and setting it aside. He settled into his chair across from her, the crackling fire between them. "Ellie," he began carefully, "I need to know about that ring. It's very important to me." She reached into the pocket of her borrowed shirt and pulled out the gold band, holding it in her open palm. In the firelight, the small diamond caught the flames and reflected them like a tiny star. "My mama gave it to me before she died," Ellie said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "And she said it would help me find my real father when the time was right." Jacob felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. "Your mother," he repeated slowly. "What was her name?" "Rebecca," Ellie replied. "Rebecca Thompson. But she told me she wasn't always a Thompson. She said she used to be Rebecca Miller." The room seemed to spin around Jacob. Rebecca Miller, his sister-in-law, Sarah's younger sister who had left Redemption nearly a decade ago after a bitter argument with Sarah. An argument he'd never fully understood. "Rebecca was your mother," Jacob stated, trying to process this information. "And she gave you Sarah's ring." Ellie nodded, then asked the question that shattered what remained of Jacob's world. "Who is Sarah? Is she the lady in the picture?" "Mama said my father married someone else because he didn't know about me." The implication hit Jacob like a physical blow. He gripped the arms of his chair to steady himself. "Ellie, what else did your mother tell you about your father?" "She said he was a good man who worked with his hands, that he lived near Willow Canyon, and that someday I might meet him." Ellie's amber eyes that now struck Jacob with their familiarity, searched his face. "She said he had kind eyes, just like mine." Jacob stood abruptly and walked to the window, needing space to breathe. Outside, lightning illuminated the canyon in brief, electric flashes. 9 years ago, before he'd met Sarah, he'd had a brief relationship with Rebecca. It had ended when she suddenly left town, and months later, he'd met Sarah. Never once had Rebecca mentioned a pregnancy. Never once had Sarah indicated she knew. "Mr. Jacob," Ellie's small voice pulled him back from his thoughts. "Are you my father?" He turned to face her, seeing now what he should have recognized immediately, the shape of her jawline, the curve of her eyebrows, the determined set of her small shoulders, all reflections of himself. "I think I might be," he answered honestly, his voice rough with emotion. "But I don't understand how you got here, or how you have that ring." Ellie clutched the ring tighter. "Mama got sick last winter. Before she died, she gave me this and a letter." From another pocket, she produced a folded, water-stained envelope. She said when she was gone, I should open it and do what it said. With trembling hands, Jacob accepted the letter. Inside was a single page covered in Rebecca's flowing handwriting. "My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, I've left this world much sooner than I wanted to. There are truths you deserve to know, truths I've kept hidden out of shame and pride. Your father is Jacob Miller, a good man who never knew about you. I left before I could tell him, convinced he wouldn't want us after he fell in love with my sister Sarah. I was wrong to keep you from him, wrong to let jealousy guide my actions. When Sarah died, I almost told him the truth. Instead, my pride kept me silent. But now, with my time running short, I must make this right. The ring enclosed belonged to Sarah. After her funeral, I did something unforgivable. I returned to Redemption and convinced the caretaker to let me say a private goodbye. While alone with her, I took the ring, telling myself she would want you to have a piece of the family you'd been denied. Take this ring to Jacob. It will prove the truth of who you are. Find him in Willow Canyon, where he retreated after Sarah's death. He deserves to know his daughter. And you, my brave girl, deserve to know your father. With eternal love, Mama Jacob lowered the letter, tears blurring his vision. The impossible had an explanation, yet it opened a chasm of new questions, new pain, and perhaps something he hadn't dared feel in years, new hope. "You came all this way alone?" he asked, looking at the small, determined child before him. Ellie nodded. "I took the stagecoach as far as Redemption, used the money Mama saved. Then I asked about you in town, and someone pointed to the canyon." Her voice wavered slightly. "I got lost trying to find your cabin." Jacob moved back to the fire and knelt before her, really looking at this child, his child, for the first time. In her face, he saw echoes of his own, but also glimpses of Rebecca, and strangely, something of Sarah too. Perhaps in the determined set of her chin. What happens now?" Ellie asked, the vulnerability in her voice betraying her outward courage. Outside, the storm began to subside, the spaces between thunderclaps growing longer. Jacob reached out tentatively and placed his large, work-roughened hand over her small one, still clutching Sarah's ring. "Now," he said softly, "we figure out how to be a family." Neither knew what tomorrow would bring, but as the fire crackled between them, father and daughter found themselves at the beginning of a journey neither had expected, one that would lead them through the tangles of the past toward the possibility of healing. The following days brought a strange new rhythm to Jacob's solitary cabin. Mornings now included an extra plate at breakfast, small footsteps on the wooden floor, and questions, endless questions from a child trying to piece together the puzzle of her newfound father and the history that had kept them apart. "Did you love my mama?" Ellie asked on the third morning, sitting cross-legged on the porch while Jacob split kindling. The axe paused mid-swing. "Rebecca was—" He searched for the right words. "She was like a wildfire, beautiful, unpredictable. We weren't together long, but yes, in our way, I cared for her deeply. And Sarah, did you love her more?" Jacob set down his axe and sat beside his daughter. "Love isn't something you can measure like that, Ellie. Sarah was different, steady, patient. We built a life together." He looked out at the canyon, its depth shrouded in morning mist. "I would have built a life with your mother too, had I known about you." Ellie nodded, digesting this. The ring, now strung on a leather cord around her neck, caught the sunlight. "Do you want it back? The ring?" Jacob shook his head. "Rebecca gave it to you. It connects you to all of us, her, me, and Sarah too." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Jacob stood, instinctively moving Ellie behind him. Visitors were rare in Willow Canyon, especially unannounced ones. Around the bend in the trail appeared a familiar figure on horseback, Sheriff Thomas Grant, his silver badge catching the morning light. At 60, the sheriff had been a fixture in Redemption for as long as anyone could remember. He had also been one of Jacob's few remaining connections to town over the past 5 years. "Jacob," the sheriff greeted, dismounting with a grunt. His weathered face registered surprise at the sight of Ellie. "Didn't know you had company." "Sheriff," Jacob nodded, "this is Ellie, my daughter." The words still felt strange on his tongue, but each time he said them, they became more real, more right. Thomas's bushy eyebrows shot up. "Daughter, well now, that's unexpected." He looked at Ellie more closely, recognition dawning. "You're Rebecca Thompson's girl, aren't you? From over Silverton Way?" Ellie nodded, stepping forward with the natural confidence that continually surprised Jacob. "Yes, sir. My mama passed last month." The sheriff removed his hat respectfully. "Sorry to hear that, child. She was a complicated woman, your mother." Jacob detected something in Thomas's tone, a reservation that went beyond the usual tactful response to mention of the dead. "What brings you out this way, Thomas?" he asked, changing the subject. The sheriff's expression turned grave. "Two things. First, folks in town have been asking about a young girl who came through asking questions about you last week." He nodded at Ellie. "Seems that mystery's solved." "And the second thing?" Jacob prompted. "Jeremiah Wilkes is out of prison, got released last month." The name hit Jacob like a physical blow. Jeremiah Wilkes, the man convicted of accidentally causing the fire that killed Sarah and 3 others when he knocked over a lantern in a drunken stupor at the town meeting hall. He'd been sentenced to 7 years, but apparently served only 5. "Thought you should know," Thomas continued. "He was making noise in the saloon last night, drunk again, talking about setting things right." Jacob felt Ellie's small hand slip into his. He squeezed it gently, drawing strength from the unexpected connection. "Appreciate the warning," Jacob said evenly, though his heart hammered in his chest. "Any idea what he means by setting things right?" The sheriff shook his head. "Man's got a reputation for holding grudges, feels the town turned against him." He glanced at Ellie, then back to Jacob, lowering his voice. "There's something else you should know. Rebecca came to see me about a month before she died." This caught Jacob off guard. "What for?" "She was asking questions about Sarah's death. Said she had reasons to believe the fire wasn't just an accident." Thomas adjusted his hat uncomfortably. "I told her the case was closed, that Wilkes confessed, but she seemed determined." Jacob felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Did she say what made her suspicious?" "No details. Just said she'd found something that didn't add up." The sheriff mounted his horse. "Could be nothing. Rebecca always did have a flair for drama. But with Wilkes back and making threats, thought you should know." After the sheriff departed, Jacob and Ellie sat in silence, the weight of his news settling between them. "Who is Jeremiah Wilkes?" Ellie finally asked. Jacob considered how much to share with a child, but something in Ellie's steady gaze told him she could handle the truth. "He's the man who started the fire that killed Sarah." Ellie twisted the ring hanging around her neck. Was it really an accident? The question hung in the air, taking on new significance in light of what the sheriff had shared about Rebecca's suspicions. For 5 years, Jacob had accepted the official account of the tragedy. Wilkes, drunk and careless, had knocked over a lantern during a heated town council debate about the new railroad line. Sarah and 3 others hadn't made it out. "I always thought so," Jacob replied slowly, "but now I'm not so sure." That night, after Ellie had gone to bed in the small alcove he'd hastily converted for her, Jacob opened Sarah's old trunk for the first time in years. Inside were the remnants of their life together, her journals, letters, the blue ribbon she'd worn in her hair at their wedding. Near the bottom, he found a small wooden box he hadn't opened since the funeral. Inside was the pocket watch that had belonged to Sarah's father, a pressed wildflower from their first picnic, and an envelope with his name written in Sarah's neat handwriting. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal. The letter inside was dated just 1 day before the fire. "My dearest Jacob, if you're reading this, I've gathered the courage to finally tell you what I've discovered. If not, then I'll have burned this letter and spoken to you directly. Rebecca returned to Redemption last month. I saw her speaking with Jeremiah Wilkes outside the Mercantile. Their conversation seemed intense, secretive. When I approached, they quickly separated. Later, I found Rebecca at Mother's grave. She confessed something troubling. She's in financial difficulty and has been corresponding with Wilkes about an opportunity involving the railroad land negotiations. I fear they may be planning something desperate. I've arranged to meet Rebecca tomorrow after the town meeting to offer help, despite our past differences. She is, after all, still my sister. If anything seems amiss, please look in the false bottom of this box. I've placed evidence there that may be important. With eternal love." Sarah Jacob's hands shook as he examined the box more carefully, finding and removing the false bottom Sarah had mentioned. Beneath it lay a folded piece of paper, a promissory note signed by both Rebecca and Jeremiah Wilkes, obligating them to pay a substantial sum to a name Jacob didn't recognize, Maxwell, Hartford. Clipped to the note was a small newspaper clipping about Hartford, identifying him as a representative of the Eastern Railroad Company, the competitor to the Western Line that had ultimately won the contract to build through redemption. The pieces began to align in Jacob's mind with sickening clarity. Had Rebecca and Wilkes been involved in something more sinister than a drunken accident? Had Sarah discovered their scheme? And most troubling, had Rebecca's recent inquiries about the fire been driven by guilt, a desire to make amends before her death? As dawn broke over Willow Canyon, Jacob made a decision. He needed to return to redemption, to face the ghosts of his past and uncover the truth, not just for himself, but for Ellie, who deserved to know the full legacy she had inherited along with Sarah's ring. He looked in on his sleeping daughter, her face peaceful in the early morning light. In just a few days, she had transformed his solitary existence and given him something he thought lost forever, a reason to seek truth, justice, and perhaps, eventually, peace. The town of Redemption hadn't changed much in the 5 years since Jacob had last walked its main street. The same weathered buildings lined the dusty road, the same church bell rang out the hour, and many of the same faces turned to watch as he passed, Ellie's small hand firmly in his. What had changed was Jacob himself, no longer the broken man who had fled to the canyon to nurse his grief in solitude. He walked with purpose, the weight of Sarah's letter and the promissory note secure in his breast pocket. Their first stop was the sheriff's office, where Thomas Grant listened in grim silence as Jacob shared his discoveries. "This is circumstantial at best, Jacob," the sheriff said when he finished, though his troubled expression suggested he took the matter seriously. "Hartford left town years ago, after the Western Line got the contract instead." "But it creates motive," Jacob insisted. "Me, if Rebecca and Wilkes were working for Hartford, trying to disrupt the town meeting where the final vote was scheduled, and if Sarah found out," Thomas continued the thought, "she might have been seen as a threat." He sighed heavily. "Doesn't prove the fire wasn't an accident, though." "Mama was scared at the end," Ellie spoke up unexpectedly. Both men turned to her, surprised. "She would cry at night when she thought I was sleeping. Said she had to make things right, that she couldn't take it to her grave." The sheriff knelt to meet Ellie's eyes. "Did your mama say anything specific about the fire, child?" Ellie twisted Sarah's ring on its leather cord. "Just that he would never admit what really happened, and that's why she had to find proof." "He," Jacob repeated. "Wilkes." Before Ellie could respond, the office door swung open, and a thin, haggard man with bloodshot eyes stumbled in. Jacob recognized him immediately. Jeremiah Wilkes, aged beyond his years by prison and drink. "Heard you were back in town, Miller," Wilkes slurred, his gaze shifting erratically between Jacob and Ellie. When his eyes landed on the ring around Ellie's neck, he visibly paled. "Where'd you get that?" "None of your concern," Jacob replied coldly. "We're having a private conversation here. Wilkes." The sheriff stood. "You should leave, Jeremiah. You're drunk again." "Drunk?" Wilkes laughed bitterly. "Not drunk enough to forget, though. Never drunk enough for that." His bloodshot eyes fixed on Ellie again. "You're Rebecca's girl, aren't you? Spitting image of her." His face contorted with something between grief and rage. "She was supposed to wait for me. We had a plan." Jacob stepped forward, placing himself between Wilkes and Ellie. "What plan, Jeremiah?" "The one that got my wife killed." Wilkes flinched as if struck. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. The fire was an accident." "Was it?" Jacob pressed. "Or was it a convenient way to stop the railroad vote and collect from Hartford?" At the mention of Hartford's name, Wilkes seemed to crumple, grabbing the doorframe for support. "You don't understand. Rebecca needed the money, said she was in trouble, expecting a child." His rheumy eyes flicked to Ellie. "Your child, Miller, though you didn't know it then." The sheriff moved toward Wilkes, hand on his gun. "Are you confessing to something here, Jeremiah?" "Confessing?" Wilkes laughed again, a hollow sound. "I already confessed, served my time for an accident, but Rebecca—" His voice broke. Rebecca couldn't live with it. Came to me last month, talking about clearing her conscience, making things right. Said she was dying and couldn't meet her maker with that sin on her soul. What sin? Jacob demanded, his heart pounding. Wilkes slid down the doorframe until he was sitting on the floor, all fight gone out of him. The lantern, she was the one who told me to knock it over. Just enough chaos to postpone the vote, she said. We didn't know the spilled oil would spread so fast that people would get trapped, Ellie gasped, tears filling her eyes. Jacob placed a protective hand on her shoulder as the sheriff moved to formally detain Wilkes. Rebecca tried to rush back in. Wilkes continued, lost in the memory. Tried to save Sarah. I pulled her back, told her it was too late. We never meant for anyone to die. You have to believe that. As the sheriff read Wilkes his rights and locked him in a cell, Jacob led a shaken Ellie outside. They sat on a bench beneath the old oak tree in the town square, the same tree where he and Sarah had once exchanged vows. I don't understand, Ellie whispered, tears streaming down her face. Mama wouldn't hurt people. Jacob chose his words carefully. People sometimes make terrible mistakes, Ellie, especially when they're desperate or believe they're doing something for the right reasons. He gently wiped her tears. But your mother tried to make it right in the end. She sent you to me with the ring and the letter. She wanted the truth to come out. Does that mean she was bad? Ellie's question cut straight to the heart of Jacob's own conflict. No, he answered after a long moment. It means she was human. She did wrong, suffered for it, and tried to make amends. There's courage in that, even if it came too late. They sat in silence as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the town that held so many ghosts for both of them. What happens now? Ellie finally asked, echoing her question from their first night in the cabin. Jacob looked down at his daughter, this unexpected gift who had brought him back from the brink of a life unlived. In her eyes, he saw not just his own reflection, but echoes of both Rebecca and Sarah, the complexity of a legacy woven from love, betrayal, regret, and possibility. Now, he said softly, we honor the truth, all of it, the painful parts and the beautiful parts. He touched the ring hanging around her neck. We remember Sarah's kindness. We acknowledge your mother's mistakes and her courage in the end. And we build something new, together, in the canyon, Ellie asked. Jacob considered this. The canyon had been his refuge, but perhaps it had also been his prison. Maybe, or maybe here, where your Aunt Sarah and I once made our home, where you can go to school, make friends. Would she have liked me? Ellie asked suddenly. Sarah? Jacob smiled, feeling a weight lift from his heart, not gone entirely, but lighter somehow. She would have loved you, Ellie. Sarah had enough love for everyone. It's what made her special. As twilight deepened around them, Jacob realized that the title of hermit no longer fit him, nor did solitary. He was, once again, connected to this child, to this town, to the painful but honest truth of his past, and to the possibility of a future he had never imagined. The ring that had journeyed from Sarah's grave, through Rebecca's desperate hands, to Ellie's innocent ones, had completed its circle. It had brought a father and daughter together and unearthed a long-buried truth. And while that truth had brought pain, it had also brought something Jacob had thought forever lost in the depths of Willow Canyon: redemption.